Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Kabarett Radio. I'm Dan Bannis. With me, as always, is my trusty best friend, Good Boy.
What's going on, everyone?
Hey, how you doing, buddy?
Doing well, man. Doing well. I love the shirt.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm from Michigan. This is, yeah. So, people from Michigan have a lot of state pride, particularly the ones that left, I find.
Oh,
yeah. A little bit of a contradiction there, but
well, you don't love something as much. What was it? Like absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Right? Yeah, I think that's the thing. Yeah. Excuse me. Like many, I got sick over the holidays, but I'm basically better, and I'm good enough to do a stream. And there's so much to talk about that even if I might have a few sniffles here and there, it's best to get right into it. So we discussed earlier today a pretty crazy event in the world of comedy.
It was like an earthquake.
It really was, and I've been avoiding social media because I haven't had to use it, which is fantastic. So I figured I wouldn't. Here we go. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, so, but I was able to at least piece this story together. Oh, shoot. What happened to it? The story of one Louie C.K.
That's right.
You remember him. He was like the biggest comedian in the world. Everyone loved him. Everyone agreed that he was their hero, and I was at a open mic several years ago now, when the show Louie first came out, and this guy who ran the mic, Robert Yasamura, asked. He always would ask people, "Anyone have anything to plug?" And people would always be like, "Oh, I'm gonna play at downtown at such and such." Downtown Independent Theater or whatever. I'm going to play at Improv. I've got a set at the West Side Comedy. But anyway, this one guy, Andrew, he said, I recommend everyone watch Louie. Louis C.K.'s new show is really amazing. And that's just how respected Louis C.K. is, that like comedians would plug other comedians' work at an open mic, which is bizarre and not common. So that's how beloved the guy was until last year, when it came out that it's a long story. Why don't you explain?
Yeah, sure. Like, I mean, I know in my circles that Louie, you couldn't get around not talking about the show Louie. I think a lot of it had to do with the proximity to New York, which was a thing. It's kind of like our show. Like, oh, this is the backdrop of New York City. Everyone's going to LA, but Louie's, one of us. He was a working comic in New York City, still does The Cellar and all that stuff. And, even the opening credits to Louie is him coming out of the cellar. Or going into the cellar, but grabbing a slice of pizza real quick before he goes down into the cellar. And it's like, man, quintessential New York, quintessential comic, the comics comic.
Yeah, comics
yeah,
comic.
New Yorker. Yeah. And I mean, essentially what occurred last year, what came out last year, was that he had been performing sexual acts in front of women. Albeit the stories are a little murky, but it would appear as though they were consensual, but because of his status as a producer, a writer, an editor for the show, and his essentially his status amongst the comedy world, his power and privilege kind of put him in a position where consent could never really be truly determined. Because of his status. Like, would there be repercussions if a woman had said no? And I think that's a whole different discussion,
Mhm.
another time and place, something that we probably would have talked about last year if we were up and running at that time. But
Yeah.
I will just say, to package that, is that it left a very unsavory tone uh, in the minds of a lot of progressive comics who looked up to Louie, in the sense that he was the, very artsy. His style was, single camera. Everyone wanted to replicate what he had going on. He was definitely at the forefront of the comedy world, and everyone that I knew, progressive or otherwise, was all about Louis. And this basically tore him apart. Now, for those, I would say, for those of us who took Louis at his word, saying like, yes, I did do this. It was consensual. However, I do recognize my status amongst these people. For me, it's a two-part thing. I kind of feel as though, like, well, once you get high up enough in the comedy hierarchy, what does that mean? Like, you can't have these sorts of interactions anymore. He's not a married man after all. I mean, he should be able to do these sorts of things. The other part of me kind of feels as though, how quickly people took a stance without, or here's a better way of putting it, how quickly people kind of discredited his comedy and lumped it in with the unsavoriness of the described events. Like, and I agree that, I mean, that's gross. I mean, like, what I've been hearing, consensual otherwise, it's like, oh, it's a little fucking weird, man. Like, not my cup of tea.
Mhm.
But I've always tried to separate the art from the artist, because I'll never know every artist that produced every piece of art that I ever enjoyed. But what I do know is my enjoyment of that art separate from the artist, because that's the origin of my consumption of said product. I always loved Louis' stand up more than I love the show Louie, to be quite frank. And I think he's an incredible stand up comic. He's an incredible stand up comic. And a video came out of an audio recording of a stand up set he did, I believe, last month.
Yeah.
And
December. Yeah, I
mid
think
December.
December 16th.
Right. Yeah,
I think it was
that
also
sounds about right.
28th, perhaps. Um,
Right.
yeah, but the one that I had access to, that I listened to, was December 16th.
Right. I think I had the
They
same
were
one.
basically the same. Uh, yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think really I was more interested in hearing his stand up, and like how much that
Hmm.
tone may have changed, or how is he going to sound. And he sounds like Louis. He sounds like Louis. His jokes are Louis C.K. esque. They attack people. He uses profane language and is flippant with how he can be insulting of people and their opinions, and embracing his own opinions as like, well, this is just how I feel about it. And it's a real ownership of his own opinions, and that's a beautiful thing. It's point of view. And the thing about Louis' point of view is that he tends to have a real every man's point of view, like every person's point of view. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, so I don't like it. Or
Every man, just like Joe Sixpack point of view, but very elegantly, as sophisticated a way as you can, or not as sophisticated, but certainly as an intelligently, as elegantly as you can put something, I suppose.
yeah,
As
I think he
I
does a
know,
I think he does.
mhm.
Sorry, Dan. I think he does a great job packaging the Joe Sixpack point of view, as you had mentioned. I
Yeah.
also think Louis is a comic that does something risque, which is, and he's always done this, which is he'll take you to the dark places in your mind that you really don't share amongst people, even close people to you. and he'll be like, yeah, you thought of that too, right? Or like, you've hated someone so much where you thought about like desecrating their grave or something. I mean, like he'll tap into that. Oh my goodness, like I would never say that, but maybe you can imagine yourself feeling the same way. And I think that is that's it. That's the thing you want to bottle up in comedy, and that's the purpose. That's what's serving of comedy, is when people can say like, "Hey, we're the release valve. We're the release valve. You may not even knew you needed, but people need to come out and say, human wise, what connects us all is that maybe we have some fucked up thoughts. Maybe we,
Yeah.
if I can keep in mind how much I hate certain people, or how much I blindly do things that society tells me to do, maybe I could be more aware of it, especially if someone is articulating that and bringing it out into the ether where it's manifested. And it's like, oh yeah, this person's saying it. And I have thought of that, but it's been a passing thought, or it's been a thought I've suppressed or like push away because no one else is saying it. Therefore, it just might be me, or that's just a fleeting thought. But it's a way of identifying a human experience. Like,
Yeah.
hey, you ever catch yourself doing something gross or disgusting? And that's definitely a Louie thing. Or, I think that the best way of pointing that out is his bits on how much he hates his kids. Because he loves his kids. He really does. I mean, that's a man who has taken ownership of his children. He loves his daughters, but he constantly talks them down on stage just like they're just fucking kids, which is the most realistic way of explaining raising kids. It's like, it's hard because they're just fucking kids, but you know what? I love them. I would do anything for them, but they're fucking kids, and they're going to act like kids.
Yeah, he really owned and made his own that point of view. Not that, like, there's before that there was like the more Cosby sort of, kids are wonderful, they're crazy, they're a handful, but they're the wonderful. And then there was the the comics that were just like really prickly, and they just they hated kids, and they were like kind of misanthropic, Dennis Leary-esque in a way, I guess. But Louie kind of wrapped those around where it's like there was no question that he loved children, but was like also extremely, endlessly exasperated by them, and in a way that was like often very brutal. But it was just it was a unique voice when he came out, and that he kind of patented, and I think a lot of people responded to that. But in terms of his set yesterday, or I saw it yesterday, I guess it blew up.
Me too.
But what I feel like, what strikes me about it is like what I thought of it or didn't think of it about it doesn't particularly matter, because it was objectively excellent. I would say objectively excellent. It was objectively very funny. The audience clearly responded very strongly to it. They were very well written, sophisticated jokes, and it was largely based in truth. The jokes were based in true observable reality most of the time. They were pretty sophisticated jokes. They were Louis C.K. jokes. So it was great to see that, and it was very refreshing. And I felt like, in a lot of ways, it felt like a moment had passed in culture. Because after watching Louis C.K.'s set and seeing that he was one of the guys who was lumped in with Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, like people who, I mean, by all means, Kevin Spacey seems like a pretty evil, very damaged, but deeply disturbed and awful man. Harvey Weinstein is a scumbag and probably a rapist, very bad guys. Louis C.K. Probably did some unsavory things, but it seems like quite a stretch, I think, to most reasonable people. I don't think most reasonable people put him in that category, but the media in general and, you know, a lot of whatever advocates and social justicey type people and hipster comedians lumped him in there. And he, in the broader pop culture, he was lumped in with them. Most people didn't buy it. And I think that broke that moment and that movement to a large extent. I don't think we see that yet, but I think it opened the floodgates where after seeing Louis C.K. come back and they're smearing him and they're going through the rigmarole, but it seems very obvious that it's not really affecting him and he's not going to apologize and he's not going to change. And I think he's a strong enough figure that we're going to see a pretty strong cultural sea change in the next year or so, but that this is the beginning of. That's how I see it. What do you think?
Well, I think you basically picked up the thing that I picked up, which was it appeared as though most people are more than ready to hear Louis C.K.'s comedy.
Yes.
And I think they always were. And that's the thing that rubs me really the wrong way. It's that you have a few pearl clutchers in the front row going, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. But they've always been there.
Right. That's been the case since the beginning.
Exactly. So my point is, since when did these people come, the pearl clutchers, as it were, come into a space where they've wielded so much power, where they can essentially ruin someone's life and do it long enough only until that person is brave enough to be like, is everyone really just going to accept this as what it is? Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that are going, hey, man, I want to support you, but that little minority of people that are easily offended, they carry a lot of weight, whether that be in, we talked about this before, whether that be in tech or, you know, in the job market, education, whatever it may be. Comedy, you know, specifically is something that we talk about. Mm-hmm. I think it's almost like Louis did the most magical thing by kind of lifting up the curtain and going like, we're still here. And you know what? I think we all are ready to have a laugh again. And I can say the naughty things and say the dirty words, and the world isn't collapsing. As a matter of fact, I think we're all strong enough to be adults here. And like, it's, you know what it reminded me of? It reminded me of, Dan, let me ask you this. When you were growing up and you had a big, I come from an Italian family. We had big family get-togethers, and there'd be the adults table and the kids table, and the toddlers were running around and all that stuff. And then once I got to be about 16, 17, I had a seat with the adults. It was a cool moment because I was going to college in a year or two. And it was like this moment where like you can hear the things that we talk about, and the conversation is different. You know, you may be talking about sports and all that stuff at the teen table with your cousins and all that stuff, but all of a sudden you graduate to the adult table and they're talking about politics. They're using words that you normally don't hear, and all of a sudden you are asked to kind of step up and kind of embrace this conversations, even if some of it doesn't really make 100%, you know, sense to you, or if this is a completely new experience. I really felt like we were back at the adults table when I heard that stand-up bit. It was about 40 minutes, and it was like, oh yeah, I remember this. This is when comedians used to treat the audience like a group of fucking adults. And we all used to be like, oh yeah, this is where you do say the naughty things. Yeah. And even at the tail end of the show, I thought, which was brilliant. The tail end of the show was a female MC, and she just takes the mic. She's like, Louis C.K. everyone. And everyone gives a nice roaring cheer. And then she just goes into this bit of like, hey, you cute guy in the front row, I'd sit on your face. And it's just like, yeah, man, I remember clubs that used to do that shit. I mean, they still do. I mean, you go to the Cellar, it's the same thing, you know. But it's like it was all hijacked by a small group of people who, if they found themselves in the club, would have to make a point that they were offended by either the comic's material or the comic themselves, not even what they were saying, but who they are. And that's I think it's like Louie being brave enough to stand out in the open a second time and go, all right, am I going to take hits? Are there any people around me that are going to say this is appropriate for me as a comic to say unsavory things? And it's like the rest of the trench piled out. It was like, no, we got you. Like, you can say this shit. This is where you belong. This is appropriate, and we're all here. Unless legal action is taken for the things he did, I'm not going to call the guy a criminal, but he is a working comic, and he's doing what working comics do, which is making people laugh in the best way possible. He's amazing at it, and he has my support.
Yeah, a few points. Like, first of all, like, it's so funny the way that you're describing these people, which is, as far as I've ever seen, completely accurate, is basically like the cops at a Lenny Bruce show in the 50s, you know, where they just can't wait to see a guy hauled off stage and have his life destroyed and his income options, you know, taken away from him. So there's that, which is absurd. Like, that's what our modern culture became for some reason. The other thing is, I feel like there was two distinct narratives that were destroyed in the Louis C.K. set. Number one was the narrative, the Hannah Gadsby narrative, that comedy is no longer about just laughter. That's obviously not true. You know, people who watched Louis C.K.'s set and that were just laughing endlessly throughout at nothing but jokes. All it was jokes. It didn't have any broader meaning. He didn't try to make it serious, which a lot of comedians would have been like, you know what? I've had enough. I can't take this. They took my life. Louis C.K. didn't do any of that. He made every element of it funny. He didn't, you know, there wasn't any cry for me nonsense, which that's not comedy. You know, there's a place for that stuff, I'm sure, but it isn't comedy, and you can't pretend that it is. So that narrative is destroyed.
Yeah, and Dan, not to interrupt, and I want you to keep your train of thought here, but I thought it was actually really telling to pick up your point. Like, there was no woe is me, no like political, like we have to do something, we can't let these people control us or whatever. It wasn't anything like that. His opening line, basically his first bit was like, hey guys, how was your year? Like, oh man, mine was rough. And it was just in a very Louis Joe Sixpack, like, you know, like life sucks, man. Like I just need to get through this next day, you know.
Paul Rubens, Pee Wee Herman card, and it's a good one, you know. It works. Stick with what works, you know. But yeah, so it's great. Like, that's the proper way to handle a thing like that. Obviously, the thing is, if people really felt that and first of all, I do want to say, like, I'm coming from a place where I don't know what Louis did. I think the problem is it's one of those stories that's like a Rorschach blot test, where what happened with Louis and these women just depends on your perspective. Some people see it as like Louis asked people something and they said no, or they said yes, and that was that. Others saw it as like he basically like sexually assaulted people. So these are very divergent. I come from a place that I don't know what happened, and so I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt when I don't think there's enough evidence that he did anything violent or you know, took anyone's autonomy away. So yeah, that's where I come from it in this regard. And the point is, the audience in general is coming from the exact same place, and you know, we can't step in the way of that in a free society, in my view. So there's that narrative. It just was destroyed. The other one is that the opinions that Louis C.K. Expressed in his set are alt-right Republican conservative opinions. Louis C.K. is openly, fervently, clearly none of those things. He holds them, and he espouses them on stage publicly and clearly. So that narrative, that like just being kind of having the traditional red-blooded American blue-collar guy opinions is alt-right, that narrative is destroyed. I mean, I think, or at least we're seeing it be destroyed.
Well, I see that constantly twisted all the time. I see no difference on why it would be twisted again. He used certain words that, would be, he used retarded. He used the word faggot, and these are words that you would hear quite often in a Louis C.K. set. So I don't know where the surprise would be coming from. However, it's like, oh, those are words that conservative Republicans use, which is so ironic because, quite frankly, those words are used amongst everyone, all populations.
I grew up in the Detroit area, which is one of the most liberal areas in the country, technically, in terms of voting patterns. Obviously, it's not, San Francisco liberal, but certainly they vote the left. And those words were, 40% of what I heard at school growing up. So.
I'm from the Northeast, and I definitely think there's that old adage of like, oh no, I called them that word meaning this, but it's actually, I know it means this now, but I mean back then it meant that. I mean, there's this sort of like backwards old, like apologetics about it, and it's like, well, that was just part of the lexicon, and maybe we have, changed as a society organically. And like, it's a bit unsavory. It's not. I don't want to call a person that because someone's sexual identity or their mental handicap. It's not something I want to constantly be using as a word. It lost its meaning in a very organic sort of way. And at the same time, I think it's so foolish to say like, well, he was offensive. And people who talk about the disenfranchised or the downtrodden in such a way would never be on the left. So therefore, they must be some alt-right neo-Nazi. It's like, that's such a stretch in terms of characterization of people who would use such words. That's something I thought of. And when I heard that, I was like, man, this is probably where they get out. Because I was looking for the alt-right sort of angle. And I said, oh, the fact that he's using these words is enough for them to kind of, share that or kind of frame him in such a way. But it isn't. It's actually was quite common for such a long time. And the fact that even that he's doing it now, I gotta be honest with you, even if it isn't as common to use those words so casually, it's still a comedic joke. It's a joke.
Well, that's the thing. Like today, alt-right just means mocking the mainstream left-leaning narrative, like which does exist. Everyone knows it, and Louis C.K. clearly mocked it. And also, more than that, I would say, more than that, being alt-right just means not apologizing and not backing down when the mob decides that you're a bad person now, which Louis C.K. is doing. He's not backing down. He's not walking, stepping away with his tail between his legs. He's not doing any of that. He's going.
What was it? The Emperor Has No Clothes. Remember that fairy tale?
Yeah.
Now, can you give me a 2-minute summarization of that tale?
Yes. So the Emperor Has No Clothes. The Emperor of some random kingdom, he had his shiny new suit, turned out to not exist at all, but he was so proud of it, and he thought it made him more powerful than ever. He came around the town completely naked because this new suit, these new robes didn't even exist. But everyone in the town was too terrified to say anything because he allegedly had power and these robes made him more powerful than ever. Until one kid pointed out that he was completely naked. The robes didn't exist, the power didn't exist, and that the problem was everyone was just too cowardly to say anything. And all it took was one person to speak out and to say what's true to rob this false hero, this false god, this false leader, this false king of his power. So, and that's what we saw with Louis C.K. I mean, this Nanette silliness, all these, and I'm sorry for just hammering her. She's far from the only person.
No, absolutely not. Yeah,
entire mainstream of comedy. That's just probably like the most filtered, distilled example, I would say. So,
I mean, I constantly see Louie as the brave kid in many ways, saying like, "Hey, this is what comedy looks like. So quit letting everybody else convince you that comedy is some sort of sterile. It's something bigger, like Nanette would have you believe. Oh, it's this political action based on power and privilege and
tearing down the bad. No, it's not.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that. This is a creative art, and no doubt, the elements of my life have been privileged due to my color. I'm not going to admit that it hasn't, but in isolated ways, not in this systemic way that it's constantly portrayed.
And the point is, regardless if that's true or not true, none of that is relevant to comedy or whether what you say is objectively funny.
Or whether or not it should be even like, why should we censor that? Like, why should we be so... Is it that dangerous? And secondly, even if it is dangerous, why should we censor thought or like the way I want to express myself as an artist? I mean, I remember when someone made a painting of the Virgin Mary of elephant shit or something like that. I forget what it was. And it's like, well, good for you, man. Like, my mother was deeply offended by that, as like a practicing Catholic, like deeply, deeply offended by it. Like, what the fuck what do you care? Are you going to go and spend money to see it? No, this guy just I felt bad for the painter. I was like, dude, you had to spend hours with elephant shit. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I mean, I'm glad you thought it was worthwhile. It had nothing to do with me. And quite frankly, I don't think you have altered the way I viewed the Virgin Mary. And there it is. Beautiful. Wonderful work. That's great. And that doesn't change the way I feel about the Virgin Mary. It doesn't change the way I feel about horse shit or elephant shit or whatever the fuck it was. I think we forgot. We are quickly abandoning liberal principles as a country, and it's scary. I mean, this is even if you consider yourself a Marxist, this is anti-Marxist, in my opinion.
Right.
This is where the great
Marxist, but he's certainly promoted socialist policies. I think he at least considers himself a socialist on some level. I mean, he's certainly friendly with those ideas. And he's also refuses to believe that anyone can just assign their own identity, their gender, blah, blah, blah identity. He also mocks the Parkland kids that were clearly being used as media puppets and stooges, and what he's doing is showing that this nonsense is nonsense and that it has nothing to do with ideology. Ideology is something completely different. Being on the left-right spectrum of like whether you think we should have centralized economies or decentralized economies has nothing at all to do with whether you're nice to people who are saying ridiculous things or you notice or don't notice that kids who survived a shooting are being used as media pawns. Pointing that out what does that have to do with your economic preferences? Nothing.
Well, when he made fun of the Parkland the shooting victims, first of all, he didn't make fun of the victims at all. What he said was, why do I have to like listen to people who have experienced pain and death when that happens all the time? And
Well,
that's a brilliant way of looking at things, and that's the
I think
beauty
he
of
did
comedy.
I think he did make fun of them on to a degree. I mean,
Okay, sure.
he did it
I
in
see
a
that.
funny way, but I mean, David Hogg should be made fun of. You know, he should certainly be mocked
Well,
because,
at least not be prevented from being mocked because of his victim status.
well, no, but he should be mocked because he is a self-styled celebrity. You know, aside from anything else, anyone who cultivates a public image should be mocked for certain. You
Which
know,
someone would even say is a Marxist idea right there, right? You know,
what
the
I
idea. No, I mean the idea of like mocking those who wield power.
is a Marxist idea.
Sure. Or the idea that you would
I
say,
mean, I think you could argue that. I think some people see it that way.
I'm just doing a
Yeah,
little bit of mental gymnastics
no,
and
no,
just
no. Yeah, I could very easily hold Marxist ideas. I definitely, yeah, sure, that's perfectly fine.
just in the liberal vein of itself, you know,
Yeah,
which is
for
the
sure.
point is, I think that so many people on the identity politics, victimhood, you know, ideas cling to such what is constantly labeled Marxist ideology. And at the same time, it isn't even that as much as these people want power. They want
Hmm.
to be able to dictate the conversation. People like Louie annoy them because they get to say whatever they want, and
Yeah,
that bothers them. The
yeah,
point is, it's not the fact they saying anything offensive. People say offensive shit all the time. It's
hmm,
that he's a white man who gets to say offensive shit.
yeah,
Now it's a fucking problem. And now
right,
we have to stop him. We have to ruin his life. Right?
right.
Just like Sargon, who used a word off Patreon, all that stuff, and now we have to gun after him. Doesn't matter that he didn't use it on the platform. Doesn't matter that people on the platform do use that word.
Hmm.
You know, it's not about that. These
Hmm.
people don't even follow the principles they say they subscribe to,
Yeah,
and it's like Louis did that. To, you know, this when seeing his set where he just pulled the curtain up and he was like, "We're still going to be doing this," and short of a revolution, because this is such a social movement and not a political one stemming from a government power, like a government crackdown, right?
hmm,
It's just a social movement. It's gonna, you know, it's gonna take police to come in here and arrest me to stop me.
hmm.
And you know what? Maybe that's what it's gonna take. Maybe it will take a revolution, a la Lenny Bruce, to say like, well, who's gonna stop me? Because it's clearly a social taboo that we're breaking, talking
Yeah,
about certain things, making fun of certain things. I mean, look at Count Dankula, who got arrested and, you know, his 800-pound fine and all that stuff.
yeah,
And at the same time, it's just a guy, you know, getting some laughs. I mean, that's all that was. As offensive as it was, who gets to decide? And I don't want to live in a society where people are saying what is and isn't funny, and if it's too offensive, it's finable. Give me a fucking break. That's not the world I'm going to live in. And that's the thing. It's not even our government that's cracking down. It's not police with batons waiting for Louis to get off stage. It's the PC police on Twitter and
right.
Facebook and all that. That's the interesting dynamic to this
Yeah,
whole thing. In the
but
60s,
honestly,
it was the
yeah.
government. Now it's social media and that minority that gets to control the conversation.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. I mean, I guess it is. It's hard to know who it is. That's what I found more and more last year. I'm hoping that that'll be cleared up. Like, who's actually behind what sometimes feels like a very concerted movement? You know, I think it's safe to, like, obviously, when every social media outlet pulls Alex Jones or Milo or you know, whoever off simultaneously, or what's his face from Vice and Rebel Media, Gavin McInnes. You know, when these people are pulled off from every platform at the same time, it's like it's clearly a conspiracy. You know, that's what that is. So it happens, but what I don't understand is like why these these CEOs, these heads of major billion-dollar companies are not interested in free markets or appealing to their broader audiences, but instead these niche people who are, highly energized social justice advocates. I guess, I mean, there's been enough studies out that show that most people don't follow that ideology. It's just a very vocal minority that doesn't actually buy things often. Like you saw that with these video games recently. What is it? Battle
5.
What is it called? Battlefield 5. Yeah. That lost, I think, EA $350 million.
Not just EA is hemorrhaging. Most of the gaming community is hemorrhaging. There's a lot of damage control going on with these companies that really felt like they couldn't make a mistake. They just got to keep pumping out the same product year in, year out, and they kind of started to bend and break to what they consider to be the large market, because that's where most of the noise is coming from, this large market. And it turns out that the most noise was actually coming from a very small percentage of their consumers, and they turned their backs on them to save themselves from harsh PR campaigns. But you know what? It's like, so that small minority is turning up the heat. Well, tell your PR people to armor up, because the majority of your consumers are going to say, you know what? No, thanks. I'm not going to get EA's rendition of what World War II looked like, because, 8 people throughout the United States, blogged about it, as Bill Burr would say, brushing off the cheese doodle dust off their fingers before they can, actually, buy a product, which they, like you said, probably won't even buy. It's a weird sort of situation we find ourselves in when people basically, as I keep saying, they kind of dictate the movements of these large companies to the large companies' own detriment. And it's like, if they just stood their fucking ground, like Louie is, thankfully, he needed to take a year off, God bless, to kind of just get out Dodge. But he's like, no, like, you're going to get OG Louie right out the gate. I'm not changing. This is comedy. And it's like, video games need to be video games too. And I'm not even a huge gamer, but you see what happens when you bend the knee and you capitulate, and that's the problem.
Well, what Tim Pool, the journalist and free speech activist, it says is that when he worked for Vice, they were told from the higher ups that their new plan would be to court the far left, because young people are far left. And so that's what they did. And every new media company did the same. And then bigger media companies emulated the little media companies that they thought were cool and did the same. It turned out, though, they were wrong, or I think more likely they were right at the time, but they did it in such a heavy-handed, obnoxious, and noxious way that it immediately turned off young people. And what we're seeing is that the Generation Z, the people who are in their early 20s, late teens now, are way more conservative in a lot of ways. They're rejecting this social justice stuff pretty substantially. And they hate it. They see through it. They've seen people like PewDiePie, who, they all love. He has 60 million subscribers, or 50 million, whatever it is, on YouTube. So they've seen too much nonsense, and they're rebelling. Like, this whole movement is failing before our eyes. So the older generation hates it. The newer generation hates it. The obnoxious millennials are the only ones who support it in any way, and most of them don't even like it. They're just too cowardly to say anything.
I really feel like the only generation, like you had mentioned, is really the millennials that are driving this. And you know what? It would be the generation I have to be fucking linked to that would do that. It was just my fucking luck that's how this would go. And you know what? Like you had mentioned, it's only a small percentage of them. The sad part is how many fucking cowards we have amongst us who are unable to kind of raise the alarm in the way that that the other generations are. I mean, Generation Z is turning their back on this nonsense. You know, the older generations who had really started this whole hyper progressive movement are the ones going like, "Hey, you guys are going a little too far in this."
Right.
And you know, I do want to be careful because I'll take a page from uh, Brett Weinstein's book when he said, "Don't call these people cowards. They have a lot at risk."
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying you have to stand up.
That was Eric
and
Weinstein.
Eric, excuse me, that was Eric. It was Eric. And I don't want to say you should stand up and put your job on the line for this, but in casual conversations with friends, when you find the opportunity, do it politely, do it gently, but push back a little bit, and you'll be surprised what ears perk up in the room when you do it, and how many people look at you like, "Oh man, I could talk to you like a person. Oh, this is wonderful." So you think giving hormone treatment to children is a problem, and yet at the same time you would be totally okay with people who identify as transgender to get surgery and hormone treatment as long as they're adults making making their own consensual decision. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna have a reasonable conversation at this end of the table if you don't mind, and you'd be surprised how many people will perk their ears up. Not too many upfront and noticeably quickly, but you'll get one or two people at the end of a party going like, "Hey man, I heard what you said and that was refreshing," or they'll give you a wink on the way out.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, I you know I do think people need to speak up, but I don't think anyone should. I think it's horrible. Like, people need to work. I totally get that, and and I think it's perfectly reasonable to follow the rules of your job, and if you think that you're going to break the rules or say something that can get you fired, it's perfectly rational to not do that. If you have kids to feed, if you have a spouse to help take care of, if you have mortgage to pay. That said, I think it's incumbent on all of us at this point to speak out however you can, and push as far as you can, like, without losing your job. Otherwise, like, it could get way worse. It really could. I mean, 2018 got awful. It got really scary, and we saw a major escalation. I mean, Louis C.K. was really just a drop in the bucket. I mean, I think it was a big step for comedy, but it's probably going to get worse with the division and the hysteria. So, everyone needs to follow Louis C.K.'s lead now in some capacity, and do what you can do. Fix your own part of the world. If you're in engineering and someone tries to bring critical theory, intersectionality into engineering, push against it. A lot of people who do seem to turn out okay. I haven't heard any stories yet, excuse me, of anyone whose life was destroyed in the long run. I mean, a lot of people had to change, and Lindsay Shepherd has had to change dramatically, but she seems to be doing okay.
I think there is a value in like rallying the troops when you need to protect yourself, and I think there's this we as a libertarian, I constantly talk about like individual rights, but I think Brett also talked about this. You need progressive ideas in your sphere of influence. You need libertarian ideas, and you need conservative ideas. You need to hold in mind the ideas of tradition. You need to hold in mind the ideas of the individual sanctity of the individual. And you also need to respect the idea of groups because we belong to them. And I think our community, whatever that may be, the free speech community, the individual rights community, whatever that may entail, we have to kind of step up and protect each other. I think Lindsay Shepherd is a great example. She's someone who I identified as left her whole life, said the wrong thing, and knew this was going to rain down hell upon her, recorded her conversation, and there was a mad rush to protect her from the community. And I think that's the only way we're going to be able to at least protect ourselves, not even defeat the other side, but at least protect ourselves while this other group is mobilized as a unit, that's the
thing. They have literally endless resources at their disposal, and they use them and they destroy people. So, you know, this is a culture war, and it's a real war. It exists. And on some level, we're all part of it, whether we want to be or not. And so you've got to, you know, it's wise, it's strategically wise to protect yourself, but you also have to be on the offensive. In this climate, if you're not on the offensive, you're going to get steamrolled. Everyone has seen it at this point. So, you know, it's nice to see Louis C.K. has his brain, has his head on his shoulders. You know, I was raised Catholic. I still have a lot of those Christian values. I believe in forgiveness, and you know, even if I don't know what Louis C.K. did, it sounds like he did some scummy stuff. He apologized for those things. I personally am willing to give him a chance, and I respect what he's doing as an artist, and I think he's hilarious, and I would say a necessary voice. So I tend to embrace him, I would say, and I look forward to seeing what he does next. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's going to be a fascinating year. But I personally, you know, I'm really want to push myself to express myself clearly, you know, and I'm trying to do that, and we'll see what happens, you know. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I know there's a lot of people in our community that feel maybe not exactly the way we do, but are starting to push back a little bit. And I think, you know, maybe it'd be incumbent upon us to maybe reach out to those people and do our thing where we say, hey, it's okay to disagree with the herd on this one, because I really don't think most of us even agree completely with the way this, you know, with this crowd is heading. You know, I think a lot of us do have reservations. Hey, maybe we're being a little too quick to condemn this person, or hey, even though it's offensive, what was the harm in really letting that joke fly? You know, hey, isn't this a space to kind of be a little crude or to say the unsavory things? You know, and there's, because it's comedy, naturally these people are here. Like that's where these people are located. So I've been kind of pushing back gently. You know, I'm not about to sacrifice my career or my life.
Yeah. Well, no, you shouldn't be a jerk anyway, you know? Like,
absolutely.
A lot of these people are jerks, and much worse than jerks, you know, bullies and tyrants and all sorts of bad things. So, you know, we got to not do that. But I think, you know, we just have to be clear and know what we believe and not be afraid to express it. So
yeah, I think what you saw with Louie in terms of the crowd and how they accepted him, what's really going to bring this movement against this sort of PC censorship is, and the financial sort of stresses of like, oh no, we can't support these people, we're going to lose all this money. You know, I think what's really going to drive this point home is popular support, open popular support. And I think open popular support of a movement that says, hey, you could say the offensive thing, even if I don't agree with it. I still want the ability to say offensive things. I still want the ability to express myself and how I think clearly and honestly, and to have that conversation. I
Yeah.
think the more and more people, and in terms of what we have been talking about with Louie in comedy, the more people that say like, no, this is what we're here for. We're here to say the things that that you, the public, don't necessarily want to say. That's what
Mm.
we're. That's what we do. That's what we do. That's our vital role in life,
Yeah.
in society, as art.
Mhm.
And I think we are really abdicating such a important part, if not the only really important part of comedy, which is like we get to be the jester and make fun of the king. And we get to make fun of the things that you go, ooh, you shouldn't say that. Or like, ooh, that's taboo.
Yeah.
But you get to be the truth teller. But you do it with a smile. You do it with, bouncing around the court, and you don't get your head cut off. And I
Hmm.
think it's about time we call an end to cutting jesters' heads off here, and just say that's as Americans, if anything, part of that liberal tradition, we're not about to go around ending people's careers because, quite frankly, we enjoy what they do. We think there's a role and a purpose to what they do, and like we had been saying over and over again, it's such a small group of people that are just very fucking loud. And you know what? We need to shut them up in sheer numbers. Hey, something million people turned into Louie's 2020 Netflix special. What
Hmm.
do you have to say about that? You know what I mean? What do you have to say about that? The silent majority, just like the people that got Trump in office, right? It's just like you can't censor them all, especially if they agree with you.
Yeah, you can't and you shouldn't. And so we'll see, we'll see where it goes. But, um, all we can do is, I think if the silent majority just needs to not be so silent,
Hmm.
and people need to know they can be vocal without being obnoxious. Uh, you know, it's hard because a lot of people have felt that they've been kind of tyrannized and talked down to, and a lot of people are angry, so they lash out when they speak. But you don't have to do that. No, not everyone can speak as like eloquently as Louis C.K., but it's like at the very least, just be like, "Hey, I thought Louis C.K. was hilarious. It was a great set." That's it, and that says a lot. Just saying that stuff like that goes a long way. So
Yeah,
anyway,
I couldn't agree more. It does go a long way. Don't be obnoxious. It works against you.
mhm,
My friends, don't have the closest magnifying glass to my political views, because I don't feel like I need to be any more political with my friends as I did in college or high school, because
mhm,
that's such a small part of me.
mhm,
They get to know who I am versus in terms of how I treat people, in terms of my personality, how I, carry myself. You get to know me a lot better than strictly by saying like, well, what's your opinion on a centralized banking system? Like we don't need to talk about that. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people are of the opinion that Louis C.K. should be able to say whatever he wants to say,
mhm.
regardless of what type of newfound political ideology they find themselves in. So do yourself a favor, be gentle, be yourself, and you'll find more and more people willing to give you the benefit of the doubt that maybe you're not a Nazi when you say Louis had a good 40 minutes.
Yeah, I mean it's hilarious. Oops, it's true, and I couldn't think of a better way to end this stream. So I think we'll leave it at that. Good boy, great stream,
Yeah,
and
it's been good.
yeah, take it easy. Take it easy, everybody. Have a happy 2019. See you
Happy
soon.
2019, y'all.